Hi there, welcome back to my channel. It's James here. I hope you're doing okay. Today we are basically giving me an excuse to talk about the things I'm propagating because some of them are exciting. I'm excited, and I kind of have been debating in my own head over which propagation method I prefer. So this is kind of just me breaking down each of the three main propagation methods that I use, and feel free to share what you think down below, what your favorite one to use is, and why, because I'm always curious to know sort of more people's experiences and why it is that we gravitate towards a particular method of propagation at a particular time with particular plants, because I definitely use different methods depending on the kind of plant that I'm propagating or that I'm rehabbing, because not all of these plants are propagation. Some of them are being rehabbed, but I think that the technique is very, very similar, because essentially you're taking a plant that either has damaged roots or has reduced root structure, and we're trying to give it an environment where that can grow back. So yeah, all of these will kind of work towards that. We're going to quickly go through water propagation, sphagnum propagation and perlite propagation in their different forms. I'm going to show you some of the plants that I have propagating in those methods, and I'm going to kind of break down the pros and cons of each of the different methods and why I'm using them for the particular plants that I'll show you. So this may be a little bit long, it may not. Feel free to skip ahead if you want to check out one of the different methods, if you're not super interested in water or sphagnum or whatever. Okay, let's get straight into it. So we're going to talk about water first, which is I think probably the most common method of propagation and the one that most people get started with, particularly with aroids. I'm sure that with other things like begonia, which I'm just starting to delve into, I don't think the propagation is the same, but I know very little about it, so we're not going to talk about that now. My main focus here is on what works with me for aroids and Hoya in particular, and I'm just realizing looking down here that I didn't bring any of my Hoya, but I'll tell you about them a little bit later. All the plants I have here are aroids, so yeah, let's get into it. Right, for water propagation, I'm going to show you two little plants. I'll talk about why I put them in this particular propagation method, and then we'll move on. So this is a large caramel marble cutting, philodendron caramel marble, which is just like such a beautiful philodendron. If you've not seen it before, it's got this like incredible variegation. The leaves come through sort of pinky red, very like autumnal caramelly colors, hence the name, and super, super nice. And I have this in here because I took a cutting at the base of the plant. So there was like a good bit of stem with some roots in different places. I took a cutting to trade with someone, and for some reason that negatively impacted the top part of the plant, even though there were healthy roots there before. And that's the first time this has happened from taking a base cutting. So I took the lowest node off the plant. So the roots kind of rotted. You can see where they are. I need to cut those off actually, the remains of the roots there. So I have it in, I cut off the top, which had a bit of healthy root, and I put this part in water to reroot. The reason why I'm doing this, so this is, let's just go through a couple of the pros to this method. So firstly, I think it's super easy. It's very, very cheap. You just water in a glass. Perfect. It also can look pretty nice. I don't think that this one particularly looks super like aesthetic, but you could have it in like a little vase or something, and that would be cute. It is amazing for plants that have a large sort of either a large number or large leaves and very, very few roots. I found that with other methods, if I put a plant that has a large leaf in like sphagnum or perlite, they don't necessarily take up as much water as they are transpiring, as they're putting out through the leaf. So I find that the water, this is just such a good way to make sure the leaves stay filled with water, and yeah, they don't die and fall off. They may, but it kind of reduces the risks of that. Also, I use it for plants that have no roots. So you'll see when I talk about the next propagation methods, both of those are kind of geared towards plants that already have some roots at least. Water I normally use if I have a plant that either has like just the little root nodules, like the little knobs, things on the nodes, or something that doesn't have it at all. So I'll take this out, and you can kind of see, because all the roots died off, you can see where the dead one was. It had no roots at all, but after a couple of days in perlite, that little red spot there, that is another root coming through. So it is doing its trick. It's doing the trick. And once it has a couple of roots, I will transfer it probably to perlite, because I find that that works best for philodendron. It is also quite space efficient. We'll talk about that in a second. I'll show you a next plant. This is my little group cup and it's a little bit dirty in there. But this is kind of a good example. Don't look at this. This is my Florida Beauty that I've had for about half a year and has literally done nothing. It's not dead yet, which is why I haven't thrown it away, but it is very, very close to dead. I'm only keeping it because of the next thing I'm going to say. Water propagation is quite space efficient in that you can have a lot of cuttings in one cup or glass or vase without worrying about having to without worrying about breaking roots when you come to pull them apart. There'll be a little bit of like teasing them apart, but with sphagnum and perlite, I find if you put more than one cutting in the same thing, which I have done, you then later on come to like a situation where you've got to like really pull them apart and you lose a lot of roots that way. So I think water in that way is really, really space efficient. It can look nice, good for plants with no roots, and it's really, really fast. I think it's one of the fastest ways to get roots straight like in your plants. You can see these are gigas cuttings, Philodendron gigas or gigas, and they had no roots at all except the little nodules about a week ago, maybe a little bit less, and you can see that they probably, maybe you can't see, they've got some decent-ish roots coming through there. And again, once these are well enough rooted, I will transfer them onto a different medium. Yeah, another little con is sometimes, it hasn't really happened in my experience, but I hear a lot about it. Sometimes there's a little bit of shock when roots are shifted from water into like soil or that kind of medium. I don't think I've experienced that, mainly because I kind of transition plants, so I'll start them in water but then I transition them either to sphagnum or to perlite, so they have a second to kind of adjust in still a very controlled environment with very, very readily accessible moisture. So yeah, it's also like easy to see when the roots are growing. Like you just look through the side, particularly in a glass container, very easy to tell what's happening in there. One more thing before we move on with the water. I found that in colder months, so during the summer it's fantastic, like basically if you give something moisture at the moment it will root, but I've found that during the winter things in pure, just straight water tend to rot. I think it's the combination of the cold and the constant wet, they seem to rot a little bit easier. Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later, but I think there are different methods which are a little bit better. Okay, moving on to sphagnum. So it's a little bit slower to start in my experience, tiny bit. Like I said, it doesn't, like with a plant that doesn't have any roots already, it takes a little bit of a while for them to generate just roots from nothing. But if you do have a cutting that already has a couple of roots, super, super easy straight away. Let's grab one. So this is not a propagation. I'll show you a couple of propagations in a second. This is a rehab plant. So this is an Anthurium metallicum that I received just a couple of days ago. And you can see it's not in the best state. Like that leaf is yellowing. This one was like disheveled. The roots are a little bit rotten, so I had to cut some of them off and I have it in sphagnum. This is kind of a good example of one of the cons. I find it a little bit difficult. If you don't have an enclosed container, it's a bit hard to regulate the moisture level in sphagnum. I find that either I have it too wet or I have it too dry. So what I do when I have a clear container is I kind of just make sure I can always see a little bit of condensation on the sides of the pot inside there. And that sort of tells me that there's a decent level of humidity inside. And I constantly check the top as well. I give it a little bit of a squeeze, and if I can still feel some moisture in there, then it's good. If there's any moisture pooling at the bottom, you have way, way, way too much water in there and you need to take it out immediately. Yeah, sphagnum can get very, very dense, and I've had many plants rot if you get... It's tempting to just keep watering because if you can't see the water, you feel like you could put more in, but yeah, be a little bit careful. I have had very little rot happen in sphagnum. I hear that some people have quite a lot of bad rotting experiences with sphagnum, but I have had almost nothing rot. I think that's just about keeping on top of the moisture levels like we just talked about, and making sure you have good quality sphagnum, because you can buy really, really bad, horrible sphagnum which decomposes too fast and gets really acidic really quickly. So you want to have, like, I go for really long strand sphagnum. I've done a whole video about it in the past. And yeah, you just want to make sure it's got a good structure for the roots to grow through. Also, that structure makes the transition to soil afterwards if you are going to go for soil. Some of my Anthurium I keep in sphagnum forever, but it makes it just a little bit easier for the plants. So yeah, there we go. That is a little rehab plant. Let's go through a couple more. So these two... this is basically exactly what I said not to do with sphagnum. I've got loads of different nodes and different plants in this little Tupperware. It's closed, so I don't have to think about the humidity at all. I'll maybe spray it like every 2 or 3 weeks, but so long as I can see the condensation on the sides of the Tupperware, I'm like, I don't worry about it at all. So in here I have got, I don't know if I can show you, I'm not going to take them out, but I've got, what is in here? So there's 2 Anthurium regale stem cuttings, quite thick, which is exciting. I think there'll be some nice leaves coming out. There's 2 stem cuttings of my Melanochrysum. I think I can take this one out. They're quite chunky cuttings. Those are from the big Milano that I was trying to save previously. Has not been going well. I had to leave the plant at my partner's house throughout quarantine, so it was 3 months where I basically couldn't check on it. Miraculously it survived, but its growth point just continuously was dying back. So I've decided to cut. I cut the 2 lowest, there's 2 nodes per cutting here. So I cut the 4 lowest nodes into 2 cuttings, and then the top 3 I think I have in Perlite. Just trying some different techniques to see what works best. And then the last one here are some Anthurium metallicum cuttings, which I took off that plant because yeah, there was just a load of stem and not enough roots for it. So I decided to cut some of the stem away, propagate them in here, and I've got the rest of it in that one I just showed you. So yeah, this is exciting. I think this is a really, really good way to have your propagations propagating. Keeps it super, super humid. I put this in on a really bright windowsill. Sometimes it gets a tiny bit of direct light, and just that little boost in warmth, so long as it's not for too long, really helps get things going. Obviously I'm going to be a little bit careful because as things start growing, the roots will start to get really, really tangled. So ideally I'd move them out of here before that happens. And I think I go back and forth between which I think is better for me, Perlite or Sphagnum. I think for things that are like single or just a couple of nodes with no leaves, I think Sphagnum is a little bit better. Yeah, I think there's less resistance to like leaves coming out. Yeah, I find it a little bit better for like node cuttings. So yeah, this is one of my little propagation boxes. I've got a couple more to show you. This is less of a propagation. This is like more of just a random jar with Sphagnum stuck in it. And in here I have, it's not propagations exactly, but again, it's the same principle with basically anything you're trying to rehab or nurture. You just want to give them optimal conditions. So these are a couple of crystallinum seedlings, some Warocqueanum seedlings, and some Anthurium bacceri seedlings. And they are just in Sphagnum, sort of tied to a little log. It's like the most basic terrarium in the world. It's not a terrarium, it's a propagation thing. But again, I don't have to worry about humidity at all. I've just got the Sphagnum in there that I've squeezed until there's no water dripping out of it at all. It's just very slightly moist, and then I put that in with the seedlings, and that is enough. You don't have to think about it beyond that. Super, super easy. I also add, if I want to, I use liquid gold leaf at the moment. I have another couple of fertilizers that I use, but at the moment I'm using liquid gold leaf for everything. Good experience so far. And I've just been putting like a couple of drops in the water when I soak the Sphagnum and then squeezing it out. So there's just a little bit of like nutrition for the plants in there. And that seems to be working quite well. Okay, last one that I'm going to show you. This is just another one of those Sphagnum. In here I have another, I've got 1 or 2, I can't remember, they're buried, 2 stem cuttings of Warocqueanum, so Queen Anthurium, I think the dark form, and then I have 1 little variegated Adansonii node in there, which when I knock the leaf off that I showed you in the last video, I just cut the lower node and I'm propagating it in here. And already there's some growth, so that's exciting. Sorry if it's getting dark. I left this video quite late in the day, so it's just going to be getting gloomier and gloomier. We're going to move on to Perlite, which is the last thing we're going to talk about today. I am really loving Perlite at the moment, particularly for philodendron. I have not yet tried it with any Anthurium. I'm a little bit nervous to do that. I've heard it works, but I am, for now, I'm sticking with my philodendron and with my Hoya. So if you are propagating Hoya, this is my favorite way. I have had Hoya rot in water. I have had Hoya, just endless Hoya cuttings rot in Sphagnum, but I have not had a single one rot in Perlite yet. I've had one die because I forgot to water it, but that's different. So Perlite for your Hoya is 100% just the best thing to do. So I've spoken about this, I think, in the past video. Basically what we're doing is passive hydroponics. So you're making a little layer of water at the base of your container, just enough so that it can then soak up through the perlite and keep the roots in a continuously damp, moist, beautiful, lovely environment. And this is another one that is really easy to add fertilizer to. You just a couple of drops in the water when you pour it in, and yeah, it's great. So this, theoretically, you could keep plants in forever. Water, I'd say some probably would be happy in there forever. Sphagnum, some anthurium I have in there, or I haven't swapped them over yet. But I think perlite, when you have complete control over like the pH and the nutrients that you're introducing into the substrate, I think potentially you could have them there for a long time. So let's just go through a couple here. So this is a really nice method that I use for some of my slightly fussier plants. I spoke about this. No, I didn't. I posted about this on my Instagram a couple of days ago. So these are two Philodendron Belmarx Fantasy cuttings. They are stem cuttings, so just 2 nodes each. And I have them in perlite, in these little ramekins, in a Ziploc bag. So the humidity is extremely high. Everything's kept very high in there. There's water at the base of each of these ramekins that's soaking up through the perlite. And it just keeps everything in a super, super nice environment. When I took the cuttings, so I have a few other cuttings of this, I put them all in different propagation methods. So I had a couple in water, I had a couple in sphagnum, and I had one in perlite. And that was the one that rooted first. So I shifted everything over to perlite and I'm having amazing results. You probably can't see, but this one here, the top node, is sending out aerial roots everywhere. So yeah, it's super exciting. I was a little bit nervous that I wouldn't be able to propagate Belmarx Fantasy. It seems to be a little bit fussy propagation-wise, but that has worked. So if you have something that's being a little bit difficult, I'd recommend that. It's also much easier to keep the environment sterile because you can boil the perlite beforehand. You can make sure it's really, really clean. And yeah, you just kind of set off from a really, really clean start. It's good. Yes, so next one I've got, so we've kind of got 3 examples here. We've got something with no leaves, we've got something with 1 leaf and no roots. So this is a Philodendron Sharonii, I think I'm saying that right, I've never had to say it out loud. Philodendron Sharonii San Antonio. So this is a really nice variety, or I think it might just be an unidentified philo actually, but it's incredible. It gets these really, really huge lobes. I'll put a picture up of it. And this just shows you that of the 3, I'd say straight water is the best for a plant that has no roots at all. Then I would say perlite is the best, and then sphagnum. So I quite often put plants that have no roots straight in perlite. And that way I don't have to think about moving them for a little bit longer. It is a bit messier, and it is, you can't really, I wouldn't have more than one. Unless it's the same plant, I wouldn't have more than 1 cutting in the same container just because the roots will get tangled and I don't want to have to interfere with them too much. Yeah, so that's an example of basically just a leaf cutting. And then the last one, I've shown you this before, this is my Philodendron Heterocrispidon. And this is an example of literally an established plant. It's got some really, really substantial roots happening. I don't know if you can kind of see them. They're very fine, but they're very, very numerous. And you can see leaves, like new shoots coming through to either side there. It's very, very happy. Again, I've got the water filled up to about there. This has got liquid gold leaf in it as well. So it is just like a very happy, good environment for a plant. I wish I'd done this with my large Melanochrysum when I first got it. Instead, I had it in water and then sphagnum and then water and then sphagnum. I just danced around from one thing to another. This is, I think, my favorite at the moment. I was talking about this with one of my plant friends just now, and we were saying I think probably when it comes to the colder months, water and perlite will be the less popular options. I think sphagnum, you can have it like so almost dry with just enough moisture to keep the roots growing, and there's much, much less sort of scope for rot there, whereas with the perlite and the water, there's more. So that's it. This was kind of like just a ramble about propagation. I hope you got something helpful out of it. It was also just a chance to show some of the plants that I'm propagating at the moment. There are so many. This is just the best time of year. I've cut basically a lot of plants, not everything, because there are some that I want to get nice and big, but I've cut a lot of things, and it's really exciting to see things growing just like every day. So I'm making the most of it while I can. Let me know what you're propagating down below. Let me know what methods you prefer, why you prefer them, and if you have any other methods that I haven't mentioned here, let me know. I know there are quite a few different ones that people use. Yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you want to see updates on these plants and on all my others, please check out my Instagram at slugplants. I post on there semi-regularly. And if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and maybe give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Have a lovely day. Goodbye.